What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and we are back with Season 2 of The Sopranos. The first episode, Guy walks into a psychiatrist office, which sounds like the start of a joke. At the end of the last season, Junior went to prison. Tony is now the de facto boss in name and everything. The FBI have even moved him up to street boss. And things are going well. You know, Tony's pretty happy. He's cut off his mother. He's making money. And things are pretty stable, as we can see in the opening montage. But things start to get thrown out of whack when Tony is going down to pick up his paper in his bathrobe, which is kind of how we start every season. And he sees that Pussy is back. Pussy claims that he was in a clinic in Puerto Rico for his back. We know he disappeared at the end of the last season when they started to suspect him. And they never got a definitive answer on whether he was an informant or not. They don't think so because Jimmy was a rat too. But even though Pussy's story checks out, Tony can't help but be a little suspicious of him. There's something in the back of his mind telling him something is off here. And we can see how that's going to play out over the course of the season. But things are thrown into even more whack when Tony's sister Janice returns from Seattle. We got to see Janice when she was a kid last season, but this is the first time we're introduced to her as an adult, and she has returned because she says that she wants to, help take care of the mother now that Tony's cut her off. But Tony knows that she's here for money. That's who Janice is. She acts like this hippie type. She even goes by the name Pavardi. But Janice's true motive is to get money and to run scams, which really start to piss Tony off. At first, he's happy to see her, but when he finds out that Janice is messing with the sale of their mother's house, he starts to get really angry. And Carmela is not happy about this. His attitude, ever since he stopped going to therapy, has gotten worse and worse. She wants him to go back, but unfortunately, Melfi is not available. She had to leave because Tony thought that Junior might go after her. So now she's working out of a motel, seeing her patients there. Another thing that's causing Tony headaches is Christopher. So Christopher got his SEC license, so he's allowed to manage a brokerage office for stocks. It's funny, it actually wasn't him taking the test, it was this Asian kid. But now Christopher is in charge of their Wabistic scam. So they have this stock that they're trying to pump and dump. Basically, it's a worthless stock, and they're just trying to make money, getting rid of it quickly. So Christopher is running that, but he's not really interested in stocks too much, so he kind of leaves. And we're introduced to his two little associates, Matt Bevilacqua, Drinkwater, as he stupidly calls it, and then Sean Gismonte. And so these are Christopher's little goons. They're complete idiots. They're wannabes. They want to be in Tony Soprano's crew, but they're nothing right now. They get into a little bit of trouble because they beat up a stockbroker who was selling a different stock, and they steal a car from the parking lot, which just draws negative attention. So Tony's really pissed at Christopher for doing this. It's funny, the Wabistic stock, it's worthless, but when Tony meets with his lawyer, the lawyer mentions that he thanks Tony for letting him buy Wabistic stock, which I can't tell if maybe Tony got the lawyer into the stock early enough where he can make money, or is it Tony literally selling worthless stock to his lawyer, which I would not put past Tony. I kind of think it's the latter because the guy mentions he sold his Disney to buy Wabistics, which is just so funny to think that he sold this great valuable stock for a piece of shit. But all this, negativity in Tony's life makes him want to go back to therapy. He's driving and he passes out thinking about his mother, and he realizes he needs to go back to therapy or this is going to keep happening. He tries going to another therapist, but the therapist refuses. He doesn't want to treat a mobster. He says that he saw the movie Analyze This with Robert De Niro, which is pretty funny. That movie came out around the first season of The Sopranos, maybe a little bit after the first season. And it's a very similar premise. It's about a mobster going to therapy. And critics have pointed out the connection between those two films. But it's Chase kind of calling out that those two concepts are pretty similar. But Tony decides that the only therapist who can treat him is Melfi. She's the only one who can kind of accept his, criminal ways and be okay with it. So he goes to her and tells her, she can come back, and he wants to go back to therapy. But Melfi is really angry at him. Her whole life was turned upside down by this ordeal. She had a patient commit suicide when she wasn't available, and she blames Tony, and she wants nothing to do with him. So as of this episode, Tony is still not in therapy, even though he wants to be now. So yeah, that is what is going on this episode. We're also introduced to some other characters who will become more important. Gigi Sestone, I think his last name is. He is brought over to Tony's crew. He kills Philly Parisi, Spoons, who he's Junior's right-hand man now that Mikey got taken out, but they want to take this guy out too because they're still enemies with Junior right now. Plus, this guy was spreading rumors about Tony, so they kill him. Of course, they would bring the actor Dan Grimaldi back again to play his twin brother Patsy. So this is not the last time we'll see that actor, but they really liked him and they wanted to bring him back. So even though they killed him off, they wrote in that he has a twin, so they can still have him on the show. But great setup episode. Season 2 is when the conflict just starts to grow from here. We're gonna get a lot of great things coming up here, including Richie Aprile, one of my favorite characters. So stay tuned for the next episode when we're gonna start to explore that. Thanks. What is up, Sopranos fans? It's your number one Sopranos YouTuber here, Kino, and I'm back with another Sopranolog, Season 1, Episode 2, Do Not Resuscitate. So we got a couple of things going on in this episode. It opens with Tony visiting Junior in prison. Junior wants Tony to make peace with his mother. There's a lot of bad rumors going around about them, but Tony refuses. He doesn't want anything to do with his mother. Tony meets with Bobby Bacala. This is the first time we're introduced to him. The man, the myth, the legend. Bobby is now kind of Junior's only real associate left. I know Junior's got some old people who still work with him, but Bobby is pretty much the only one now that Junior is out of power. So Tony talks to Bobby about the arrangement. So Junior gets to keep the title of boss. He gets to keep 5% of his action, including the Joint Fitters Union. But everything else now belongs to Tony. Tony's taken control of it all. And unfortunately, Junior has to just accept this. There's nothing he can do. There's a problem, though, at the work site for the Joint Fitters Union. There's a protest going on. This black reverend and his followers are mad because there's not any black people working at the job. They're protesting it. They're holding up business. And then Jack Mazzarone has to ask Tony to ask Junior to basically come help break it up. So Tony has his guys go down there. They provoke the crowd, get into a fight. A bunch of them show up and they just beat these guys up and break it up so that business can continue on as normal. It's revealed at the end of the episode that the Reverend who was organizing the protest was in on the whole thing. He's Tony's associate, and this is kind of a scam that they're running. They're holding up the job site intentionally to get money from the job owner, and then they split the money. So that this is a scam that they're working on. It just goes to show you that everyone's getting a taste. At the end of the episode, Junior is released from jail. He is placed under house arrest. He's got an ankle monitor. He can't leave. While he's at home in the shower, he falls down and breaks his hip. So Tony has to come help him and carry him to the car, and they go to the hospital. And it's this kind of tender moment between the two of them. I think earlier Tony had just learned that the Reverend's father had died, and it got him thinking about that generation passing, the older people getting weaker, and someday they're all going to be gone. So I think it helped kind of rekindle a affection between Tony and Junior. I think Tony really is starting to care about Junior more and forgive him for the role in having him almost killed. But that's the one plot going on in this episode. The second is with Janice and Livia. So Janice continues to visit Livia in the hospital and try and take care of her. Livia is not having it. She doesn't like Janice at all. She's been a problem child ever since she was little, and Livia just does not trust her at all. That kind of changes when Janice brings some old music that Livia likes and plays it for her. They start to bond over that, and Livia's starting to actually like Janice now. They're starting to get along. Tony even agrees to not sell their mother's house and instead let Janice and Livia live in there together. Tony's not really fooled by this, but he just wants to kind of see Janice suffer with Livia for a little bit. But this all kind of comes crumbling down when AJ goes to visit Livia and he talks to her about DNR. So he overheard Janice and Tony arguing about whether their mom should have a DNR or not, a do not resuscitate order. Basically, if something happens to Livia, like she gets hurt or something like that, or in a coma, they don't want the doctors to bring her back. Livia realizes that the reason Janice wants this is because what she's really interested in is Livia's money. She wants to get her back to the house, take care of her, make her dependent on her, so that she can find out where the money is and then get rid of Livia. That's Janice's whole scam. And Janice pretty much confirms this because we see from her perspective, she's kind of imagining pushing Livia down some stairs and just getting it over with. And so, yeah, that's really what Janice is all about. She doesn't care about her mom, just like everyone else in the family. She's just looking out for herself. But for as of right now, Livia doesn't trust her, but she's going to move back in with her. It's kind of the only option because Tony's not going to continue to pay for Green Grove. Which, funny enough, Livia actually wants to move back there, even though she complained about it that whole first season. She realized she actually kind of likes it. So that's the main things going on in this episode. The other little detail, though, we learn is that Pussy is 100% a rat. He's at the doctor's office, and he gets picked up by an FBI agent, Skip Lipari, also known as Lisp Lipari. Yeah, Pussy is 100% a rat, and he's lying to the FBI. He says he hasn't met with Tony yet, but we definitely know that he has met with Tony. So he is playing both ends against the middle. Trying to manipulate both sides to stay alive and out of prison. But we know that that's not going to last forever. So yeah, that is this episode. Really good one, and I really can't wait for the next one because we're going to get introduced to one of my favorite characters. So stay tuned for that. Thanks. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. You know what this is. It's another Soprano log. Season 2, Episode 3. Side note, if you're confused about the title of the episode is Toodle-Ooh, but I'm worried that YouTube might flag the video or something if I put the F word in the title. So that's why it's Toodle-Ooh on this video. But just know that the real title is Toodle-Ooh. I've been waiting for this episode for a long time because it introduces one of my favorite characters of all time. So let's get into it. So Richie Aprile is Jackie's older brother. He's been in prison for the last 10 years, but he's released. The first thing he does is he goes and visits Beansy Gata. Beansy owns some pizza joints. He used to run drugs for Jackie and Richie, but when they went away, he invested his money into the pizza places, and now he's a legitimate businessman. He has a close relationship with Tony Soprano, so when Richie goes and tries to shake Beansy down, Beansy refuses. He says that he's not just going to roll over. Richie reacts very violently to this. He smashes a coffee pot into Beansy's face and hits him with a chair. And we can tell that right off the bat that Richie has some anger problems, some resentment problems from being in prison. Meanwhile, Tony is called by a cop on his payroll to his mother's house. Meadow was throwing a party there. The house is destroyed. There's puke everywhere. One of the kids OD'd. Meadow was not on drugs, but she was drunk, and she just kind of refuses to take responsibility. Tony and Carmela debate how they should punish her, but they're kind of scared because with the modern laws, they can't really do anything to her. And they're actually living in fear of her a little bit and of her realizing that they really don't have any power over her as a modern kid. But Meadow kind of manipulates them. She actually suggests what the punishment should be. So she loses her credit card for 3 weeks. But it's great because when they take the credit card away, now they have to pay her an allowance to get gas and do stuff with. So it's great. She basically manipulated her parents into paying her for being in trouble. Meadow's just she's as scheming as her father, and it's great to see that here. Janice is originally supportive of Meadow, her whole hippie freedom, treat kids with respect mentality. But she gets pissed off when she sees the state of the house, because that's her house now, or at least she's going to live in it with Livia. So she goes over to Tony and Carmela and starts yelling about them, about their parenting style. This upsets Tony and Carmela, and they finally snap at her and tell her to just, mind her own business. Don't get involved with their children. Janice decides she's going to move out from the Soprano house, but later Carmela kind of convinces her to stay. They kind of patch things up. And this is the first instance where we're mentioned that Janice has a son, Harpo, later named Hal, who lives in Montreal with his father. Even though Janice makes up an excuse about the dad took the son away, I kind of get the feeling that Janice just basically abandoned her son. She hasn't really made any attempt to be a mother, and that fits with her character. Speaking, though, of children and families, we get an interesting detail here that I noticed for the first time, which is that Tony mentions that Carmela has a sister. I looked this up. Apparently, he mentioned it a couple of times before, but I didn't notice it. We are never shown this sister ever. She's never mentioned by the parents, but she is mentioned a couple of times in dialogue. So I guess she just, lives somewhere else, doesn't interact with the family. I guess that makes sense because Tony has a sister, Barbara, who also doesn't really interact with the Soprano family. But at least we see her a couple times. But that's just a weird little detail I noticed. So later, Tony is at dinner with, his mob friends, and Melfi is there too with some of her friends. She's a little bit drunk, and they run into each other. And Tony doesn't really want to acknowledge her because he's trying to hide the fact that she was his psychiatrist. And also, I think he's still a little upset that she refused to see him. And so his friends kind of just assume that that's one of his girlfriends. And, they kind of bust his balls about it a little bit. But he's kind of embarrassed and doesn't really want to talk to her. Melfi's embarrassed as well. She says, as she's leaving, Toodle-Ooh, which is where the title comes from. And later, when she's talking to her psychiatrist, she's wondering why she did that. And she thinks it's because she feels guilty about not treating Tony. And by acting like a little girl, it was her way to kind of escape responsibility. And we do see later that she has a dream about Tony having a panic attack on the road, crashing into a car and dying. So we can see that she does feel responsible for Tony and kind of feels guilt for cutting him out of the therapy process. Tony later has a welcome party for Richie at the Bada Bing. It's funny, we actually see the bad comedian who we saw in season 1. He was doing stand-up for at the old folks' home, and he was just as terrible as he was here. But it's funny they brought him back. So Richie's getting some money from the other mobsters, but Richie's kind of obsessed with Beansy. He has all this negative feelings towards him, and is just kind of harboring all this resentment because Beansy's kind of successful, and Richie's been stuck in prison all this time. There's also a little detail I noticed too, which is that Richie gets a blowjob from one of the strippers at the Bada Bing, but he can't. I guess he can only finish in the dark, or maybe he couldn't finish at all. I couldn't really tell what they were implying there, but basically he's got trouble having relations with women. Some people I think have suggested that this is because he's gay, or maybe because he was in prison and he was having sex with guys. I don't really know, but we can definitely see that he's got some issues. We would see that later with him and Janice, that he's got some sexual proclivities. But mostly, I think it's just Richie is obsessed with violence, and that's why he goes after Beansy. He runs Beansy over with his car and paralyzes him. Tony goes to visit Beansy in the hospital, and the doctors are basically saying that Beansy might never walk. And we do see that in season 6, that he's still in the wheelchair for life. So Tony reprimands Richie for the attack, and warns him that if Richie ever crosses him as boss, there's going to be trouble. He has this great line. He says, I'm the motherfucking one who calls the shots. Just great little bit of dialogue there. Richie has some great bit of dialogue too, because Tony was saying, I thought I told you to back the fuck off, Beansy. And Richie's like, I did. Then I put it in drive. Just a really funny line. And I got to say here that the reason I love Richie so much is the actor, David Proval. He is just fantastic. Even though he's a short guy, Gandolfini towers over him. His eyes, he just has this really menacing look to him. And it's just perfect for this character. I love seeing him and Tony interact because Richie has incredible moxie for his size, as Junior says. But Richie actually goes and talks to Junior at the doctor's office, and he's kind of laying hints that he doesn't want to take orders from Tony. Tony's younger than Richie is, and Richie does not feel comfortable taking orders from him. He mentions actually to Tony about he saved Tony from when him and Jackie stuck up Feachlum on his card game. This is the first time that's referenced, and they would expand this story later on in later seasons. But basically, Richie feels kind of passed over. He feels like he's not getting the respect and the benefits he deserves for being in prison all this time, and he's kind of starting to resent Tony as the boss. So we can see this is absolutely going to lead to trouble. But Richie also is trying to start up a relationship with Janice again. They dated when Tony was younger. Richie goes to yoga class with Janice. He's kind of into Eastern philosophies now. He read about them a lot in prison. And Janice is, of course, into that as well. And it kind of starts to look like they're going to pick things back up and get back together. So that's pretty much what happens in this episode. The last little bit at the end is Tony goes to Livia's house and sees Meadow there of her own accord cleaning up. She heard that Janice was mad about the whole thing, and she takes responsibility and goes down there and cleans it, which is really interesting. As spoiled and selfish as Meadow is, and she is, because we see her earlier in this episode making a mess in their kitchen, talking shit about her parents, not really caring. She does take responsibility when it's needed, and she goes there of her own accord. So much respect to Meadow for that. She's trying to make it right. So Tony's a little confused when he sees that because he's just not expecting Meadow to be responsible at all. But it's just an interesting detail. So yeah, great episode, great introduction of one of my favorite characters, and can't wait to see more of him next episode. Stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming soon. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and I'm back with another Soprano log, Season 2, Episode 4, Commendatori. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, any Italians, but the episode opens with the guys watching The Godfather. Tony's a little annoyed because they watch this all the time. It's funny that Paulie's talking about what his favorite part is, and he mentions it's when Michael grabs Fredo and is like, "It was you, Fredo." And we can see Pussy behind him. And of course, Pussy is a traitor just like Fredo was. So that's an interesting little call out there. We move on to this white, rich family. They have a nice car. They're driving downtown somewhere. And they get robbed by some black guys. And it's funny, the dad yells out a very bad word when the black guys rob him. And he's like, who else would rob us besides them? And then we cut to Tony looking at pictures of the cars. So even though it was the black guy stealing the cars, it was Tony's operation, and he's actually the one behind it. But we learn that Tony's going to Italy to negotiate a deal with the Italian mafia to sell these cars that they've stolen. This was originally Uncle Junior's operation, but Tony absorbed it when he took over all of Uncle June's stuff, and he's going to meet with the family there, whom Tony is distantly related to. So it's kind of like a homecoming for him and the guys. They're going to their homeland. So Tony flies over there. His contact there is Furio, who we meet for the first time. Furio speaks English, and he introduces the Soprano crew to the guy who's in charge there. They're supposed to be meeting with a guy named Zivitorio, but Zivitorio is an old man now. The one who's really running things is his daughter. His daughter married another very powerful mobster. That guy's in prison for life. And so his daughter, Annalisa, is now the one kind of running things, which Tony's kind of flabbergasted by. He doesn't like the idea of a woman boss. But Furio is actually a really good translator. The guy he's talking to is kind of insulting Tony in Italian, and Furio translates it in a very polite way. So he's a very good diplomat, in addition to all his other skills as an enforcer. But they're talking to these mobsters, and it's becoming quickly apparent that they're not really familiar with their own culture. They're kind of outsiders. They don't like the food. They don't speak the language. They come off as very crass and unsophisticated to the Italians. who look down on them. So despite all they talk about, being traditional Italians and so proud of their culture, they really don't fit in that well. Christopher starts using drugs. He's been using heroin this whole season, but we see him, shooting up in Italy with some of the guys there. It's funny. He talks about the fact that he's gonna go see this volcano, this crater, and nothing's gonna stop him. But he ends up not going because he just wants to get high instead. So it's kind of a hint that he's his own worst enemy. His drug use is going to get in the way of his goals, which we'll see later on. There's a good David Chase cameo when Paulie is in the cafe. He's trying to connect with the Italians there. He's just randomly saying Commendatori, which he heard from one of the Italians, to pretty much anyone he meets on the street. And we can see David Chase right there as an extra in the scene, looking at Paulie, not really giving a shit about him, and then turning around. And then he calls him a cocksucker, which is pretty funny. So Tony has to work with Annalisa, even though he doesn't really want to. It's also complicated by the fact that he's attracted to her. He has this dream about having sex with her. But again, the idea of like having to negotiate with a strong woman just really annoys him. So Tony wants Italian guys to come over to America. He's worried about the loyalty of his crew, and he figures that these old school Italian guys will be more loyal and trustworthy. So he wants Furio. Annalisa doesn't want to let Furio go because he's the most loyal and talented member of her crew. But eventually they reach a deal where he'll lower the price on the cars, and she'll give him Furio and some other guys as well. Eventually they go home. It's funny, Paulie's completely lying about feeling right at home. He was just as much an outsider as everyone else. And there's just feeling of disappointment to be back in America. Their life here is much more plain than the one that the Italians live, even though they have more money here and stuff like that. So just a really interesting look at their culture and their background. But that's the first main thing going on here. The second is that Carmela and Rosalie are having lunch with Angie, Pussy's wife. At first, she's kind of lying about being glad that Pussy's home, but she kind of breaks down in tears and reveals that she hates Pussy. She doesn't want to be married to him anymore. He's just been a complete asshole their whole marriage, and especially now, he's just so not there. He disappeared and then came back without any kind of warning. And he's acting really strange, not really caring about the fact that she might have breast cancer. And we know that Pussy is going through some stuff because he's an informant now. He's trying to keep everything a secret, not get killed. And this is kind of starting to mess with him mentally. He gets recognized with his handler, Skip, at a party store by some Elvis impersonator. And this really drives him crazy. He's worried that the guy might say something. So he goes and kills the Elvis guy for no real reason other than just the fact that he's paranoid. So we can see Pussy is starting to lose it here. Carmela talks to Janice about the divorce situation with Angie. Janice kind of makes Carmela feel bad for basically being a housewife and not really asking much out of life. She's content to just be a housewife. And that makes Carmela feel bad. So she goes to Angie and really tries to convince her not to get a divorce. She lists a bunch of reasons why, but I think the main thing is that Carmela does not want to face her own situation, and she doesn't want Angie to divorce Pussy because then Carmela will have to think about, do I want to divorce Tony? And that's a difficult question she doesn't want to think about, even though she is as unhappy as Angie is. She wants to pretend that things are good, and Angie leaving Pussy would kind of disrupt that. And we do see at the end of the episode when Tony comes back home, she has this look on her face that she's not really glad he's back either. But that's kind of Carmela's whole personality, is she doesn't want to think about that kind of stuff. She just wants to escape from the reality of her situation. So yeah, that is Commendatori. Really good episode. I loved seeing all the Italian parts. It was great to be in a different setting for once. And we got a new character coming over, which is going to be great to see. Furio is an awesome, awesome character. So stay tuned for him next episode and the next Sopranolog. Thanks. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. And I'm back with another Soprano log, Season 2, Episode 5, Big Girls Don't Cry. And this episode happens to be the first one written by Terry Winter. He was one of the writers on The Sopranos starting in the second season, and he went on to go create Boardwalk Empire, another really great show. And he's a really great writer, which we can see in this episode. So there's two main storylines going on. The first is that Furio has come over to America to work for Tony. Tony gets Artie to hire him to make cheese at Vesuvio. It's kind of a way for him to just kind of get through immigration and have a job here in America. Tony throws a party for Furio at his house. Furio actually references that he saw Two Women on AMC, which is an Italian movie. It stars Sophia Loren, really great actress. She was in The Fall of the Roman Empire, which I did a video about. You should check that out if you're interested in Roman history. But a really, really well-acclaimed movie. It has to deal with Italy during the war. There's some very controversial scenes during that film. And he references that they play here in America, which apparently they don't in Italy. So Tony has Furio start working. He sends him to go collect money from this guy who runs a whorehouse. He's been late on his payments. He gave Chris some excuses earlier in the episode. And he sends Furio in there to just beat the shit out of him and his wife. Really great scene. It's all done in one take. Furio just storms into the place and starts beating people up and shooting the guy in the leg. And we can see just right off the bat that Furio is a serious guy and he's a serious threat. So you don't want to mess with him. With Furio here in America, Tony wants to take a step back. He wants to distance himself from criminal activities because he's worried about the FBI arresting him and getting in trouble. So he promotes Paulie and Silvio to basically be his underbosses. All the orders are going to go through those two. And notably, Pussy is excluded from this position. Tony doesn't really trust him right now, and he gets passed over. So Pussy feels really marginalized by this. He's complaining to his handler about, Tony not really showing him respect. And we can see that Pussy is leaning more and more towards the FBI and developing that bond there rather than with his mob associates. So Tony hears that Janice has taken out a loan on their mother's house. This really upsets Tony. He destroys the phone when he hears it. He goes over there to confront Janice and finds that Richie's there. They had slept together and they're starting to rekindle their relationship. And Tony's really infuriated by this because one, he's mad at Richie for hurting Beansy when he told him not to, and then he can just see there's going to be a lot more trouble with Richie and Janice together for him. And Tony starts to recognize that he's going through emotional problems. He doesn't have the therapy to really help him out anymore. He tries talking to Hesh about what he's going through. Hesh reveals that his father also had panic attacks, so we can see that it's a hereditary thing. And later on, we would see that also with AJ. So it's kind of the Soprano curse. It's in their bloodline. But Hesh is not really a good listener. He doesn't really want to listen to Tony's problems. And Tony he's trying to talk to someone because he doesn't have therapy as an option. Meanwhile, Melfi is feeling really guilty about abandoning Tony. She's talking to her psychiatrist about wanting to accept Tony as a patient again. He thinks it's not healthy for her. He realizes that Melfi is getting a vicarious thrill from treating a mobster, and that's just not a good thing for the therapist to feel for the patient. But she calls Tony and invites him back to therapy. He agrees to go, and they're back in therapy again. They're back at it, and I'm glad because I really like Melfi and Tony scenes. They're awesome. So that's the first main storyline going on. The second is with Christopher. He's attending acting classes. Adriana bought him these classes because it's geared for writers, and Christopher's been struggling with becoming a screenwriter. So he goes to these classes and tries to learn acting. He's having trouble with the scenes that are given to him. He really wants to do mob scenes and tough guy scenes. He doesn't really want to do this deep emotional acting. The teacher kind of pushes him to do the scene and challenge himself and to really open up because that's what acting is all about, is being truthful. Chris does a scene from Rebel Without a Cause. He starts crying to his dad, who's played by another guy. And, it's a really great scene. He does it really well. He opens up, starts actually crying. But he's kind of ashamed of this. He doesn't want to like open up and be emotional. And in fact, the next day he goes and beats up the guy who played his dad just because all this acting has uncovered some, emotional issues that he has and he's not ready to deal with. So he doesn't make it through the class. And at the end of the episode, he takes all of his screenwriting stuff and he just tosses it. So we can see that he's getting fed up with the writing and is not ready to be emotionally honest about who he is and what he wants. So really interesting episode. I can't help but feel that the screenwriting stuff probably comes from Terry Winter himself and his experiences as a screenwriter. But it's a really interesting episode, and can't wait to do the next Sopranolog. Coming soon. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. I'm back with another Sopranolog. This time we're doing Season 2, Episode 6, The Happy Wanderer. So this episode opens, they're at Meadows School. They're hearing from colleges and about how hard it is to get into them. The kids really need extracurricular activity. So Meadow is doing a choir event with her friend Eric Scatino. Now Eric's dad, Davey, is a childhood friend of Tony's as well. So they grew up together, and we learn that Davey is a gambling man. He hears that Tony is now running the executive game. It's this high-stakes poker game that his father and Junior used to run. But now that Junior is under house arrest, Tony has taken it over. So Tony refuses. He doesn't want to get Davey involved because this is a serious game. And so Davey goes and gambles with Richie instead. And he ends up about $7,000-8,000 into debt with Richie, which he's not really able to pay back. His finances are not super good. He owns a sporting store, but he's still not able to pay Richie, and Richie's getting a little upset at him. So Tony meets with Junior to discuss the game. We learn that Junior has another brother besides Tony's dad. His name was Ercole. He was born, either retarded or mentally deficient, whatever you want to call it. And so he had to go stay in a special institution who could take care of him. So they host the executive game actually at the hotel that they got from the Jews when Tony solved that guy's problem with his son-in-law. So now they get to use the business for whatever they want. They're hosting the game there. Tony has Christopher and his two friends, Matt and Sean, helping him out there. And he has some very high-level players. So we've got Johnny Sack. We've got Ira Freed, who is a penis doctor, apparently. I didn't know that was a thing. But he's very wealthy, so he plays there. Frank Sinatra Jr. is actually one of the players. Apparently he knows Junior, and that's the real Frank Sinatra Jr. And then, of course, we have like Paulie and Silvio. And we get to learn an interesting detail about Silvio is that he gets very angry when he gambles, and he freaks out when something goes wrong. It's a nice little detail to add to Silvio because he's we don't know a lot about him. He's not that active in the story and plot. He's kind of more of a quiet side character for these beginning seasons. And it's nice that we get like a interesting character trait for him. It really adds life to the character. So Davey comes by the hotel and he manages to convince Tony to let him into the game. Originally, he only has, $5,000 credit. But when Tony is sleeping, because the game goes all night long, Davey actually gets into about $45,000 worth of debt, which he absolutely cannot pay back. And Tony's really mad at him for doing that, and warns him that this is serious and he actually has to pay. It's not a game. Richie comes by and sees that Davey is there as well. And this really angers him because he already owes Richie money, and here he is getting into even more debt. He starts a physical altercation. Tony shuts it down, but it effectively just ends the game. And Tony yells at Richie for doing that and for disrupting the poker game. He eventually taxes Richie by saying that Davey has to pay Tony back first instead of Richie. So Tony gets his money before Richie gets his. And then Janice kind of plays this up as more reason for resentment between Richie and Tony. we could really start to see some problems boil up between the two of them. So Tony goes to collect the money that Davey owes him. Davey says he's tapped out, and Tony, just slaps the shit out of him and, warns him that tomorrow he better have money or else. So Davey's at the end of his line. He has no money to give, and he ends up selling his son's car to Tony. And Tony tries to give it to Meadow, but she realizes it's her friend's car and gets really upset by this. But Tony refuses to give it back, saying that, this is how he makes a living and it's not his fault. It's the dad's fault. And we'll explore that more next episode. He'll talk more about why he did this. But it drives a rift between Meadow and Eric. They were supposed to do this choir event together. It's an extracurricular activity for them to get into a better college. But Eric doesn't want anything to do with Meadow or her family after this. He's really upset about losing his car. And then Meadow ends up doing the song solo, which is actually what she wanted the whole time. So it actually worked out in her favor in this case. So a really interesting episode. We'll see more of Davey later on as they run a bust out on his store. But yeah, great episode, and can't wait for the next Sopranolog. Coming soon. What is up, Sopranos fans? It's your boy Kino, and we're back with another Sopranolog, Season 2, Episode 7, D-Girl. So this episode revolves around, Hollywood and the movie industry. Chris is meeting with his cousin and his cousin's girlfriend, Amy. Amy works in the movie industry. She is a vice president of development. Chris refers to her as a D-Girl, which is actually a derogatory term. It kind of implies that she's just kind of a grunt worker, just kind of doing busy work for the director. But Amy does, work for, some famous directors. She says she's worked with Tarantino, and currently she's working for Jon Favreau. They have this great little detail is that whenever someone famous is brought up, she refers to that famous person as a friend. It's kind of this really obnoxious, like, Hollywood thing to do, just kind of exaggerating, your claim to fame and how many famous people you know. Just a great little detail for a Hollywood type like Amy. But they're at a bar, and Chris, impresses Amy because there's this guy who's being obnoxious. He goes up and basically tells the guy to get lost. And this kind of turns Amy on to see how powerful Chris is as a mobster. So Chris goes to the set with Amy, and he meets Jon Favreau. They're filming this scene between these two actresses, and Chris helps out. He tells them that they should use this word, this Italian slang word, in the scene, and it goes really well. Jon Favreau is impressed. Eventually, they go out for lunch together. They go get some pizza, and Chris talks to them about mob life. He tells them this story about a mobster who had sex with a transgender person and got really upset when he found out, and he burned the person with acid. And they're kind of just fascinated by all these mob stories that Chris has. So meanwhile, AJ has stolen the family car and is driving around, even though he's too young to drive. He's got some friends in the car with him, and they get into an accident. So he gets in trouble for that. AJ reveals that he's, questioning life. He got assigned The Stranger, which is this existential novel, and now he's questioning the meaning of everything. He doesn't really believe in God anymore, and he's wondering what's the purpose of life. And this upsets his parents greatly, as devout Catholics. They don't want to have him spouting off this nonsense about God is dead. AJ reminds me a lot of myself at this age. I went through an existential, phase where I was questioning everything, and I was, I didn't believe in God and all this stuff. I think it's pretty normal for a teenager like AJ. And it's a nice little detail they have for him. So Tony takes AJ to Pussy, and hoping that Pussy can talk to him and set him straight. Pussy takes him to the batting cages, tries to get him to, tone this down and just do what he's told. But AJ is still questioning things. He's not really believing in the confirmation ceremony, the Catholic confirmation that he's supposed to have that weekend, and he doesn't really want to do it anymore. There's a nice little detail too that when Pussy's chastising AJ about wrecking the car, he immediately gives him some money to go buy a soda and chips with it. So he's chastising him, but he's also rewarding him. And we see that hypocrisy throughout The Sopranos. It's why the kids are so spoiled, and it's because they don't really punish them. They actually just, whenever they get in trouble, they end up rewarding them because it's easier than punishing them. So AJ goes to Livia for advice because, he thinks she's older and she might have some wisdom to help him out. But Livia just makes it so much worse. She is the most depressed, dark person there is. She has this great line where she says, don't expect happiness. You're not going to get it. There's no point to life. What makes you think you're so special? I love that scene between the two of them. It's so dark, and it makes AJ even more into this pointlessness of life phase. So meanwhile, Chris goes to meet with John. John is asleep, and then so he goes to meet with Amy instead, talks to her about his screenplay, and then they end up sleeping together. Later on, Chris meets with John, and again, they're talking about mob things. John wants to know, how the mob works and stories, and if Chris killed anyone, things like that. And Chris is completely oblivious to the fact that he's a terrible writer. He keeps talking to John about his screenplay, and it's so bad. It doesn't make any sense. The main character wears like tap shoes when he's killing people. It's stupid. I can't stop laughing when John's trying to talk to him about putting more emotion into the script, and then all Chris can think about is like, the roof is soft tar. He sounds so stupid when he says that. It's great. At dinner, he goes to meet with Adriana, Tony, and Carmela. They're having like a double date. And then Chris is very moody because he's not really into his New Jersey mob life anymore. He wants to be in Hollywood. He wants to be with these people. And he, causes a little bit of a scene. Adriana reveals to Tony that Chris is working on a screenplay. And this really angers Tony because he's worried Chris might be giving away mob secrets. Chris goes to sleep with Amy again, and then finds out that John stole the story about the mobster who slept with a transgender person. And Chris does not want this story in the movie because it could get him in trouble, because this is a very private thing, and the mobster would not want this revealed to the public. So he's really mad at John and Amy for doing that. Eventually, Amy leaves Chris. She's going back to Los Angeles. They don't want his screenplay. One, because, it's just terrible. And then two, mob movies are not doing well, apparently. So they're not going to go in that mob direction anymore. And then Chris is a little heartbroken by this. He liked Amy, and he was really excited about maybe going into this Hollywood life. And now that's been, taken away from him. So there's a confirmation party at Tony's house after AJ gets confirmed. AJ is caught smoking weed, and so his parents have Pussy go and talk to him. Meanwhile, Pussy has been getting squeezed by the feds. They want more information about Tony. They want him to wear a wire. He's really upset by this. He doesn't want to do it, but he has no choice, or else he's going to go to jail. And this is really taking a mental toll on him. He freaked out when his wife almost saw the wire, and he almost attacked her. So we can see that he's really spiraling, trying to balance out these two lives he has right now. One is an informant, and then one is a loyal soldier. Pussy goes to talk with AJ and talk to him about, respecting his father, because his father's a good guy. He talks about all the things that his father did for Pussy. And he actually starts to break down crying because he realizes that he's betraying a really close friend who was there for him when he needed him. So we can see that this is just wreaking havoc on Pussy's mental state. And he's crying in the bathroom afterwards. And the FBI are actually listening to him crying. It's pretty funny. But Christopher eventually shows up at the party. And then Tony tells him that he has to choose between the mob or his other desires. He can't be doing both. And if he chooses not to, follow the mob life anymore, Tony never wants to see him again. But if he does choose to stay, he needs to commit himself 100%. So Chris goes out to think for a minute, and then as the episode ends, he goes back in and decides that he's going to commit himself to the mob. So that's the episode. Really good. I liked Christopher's whole dilemma here. He's really trying to find out who he is, and now he's reached the decision that the mob is the only life for him. I know he'll get into Hollywood a little bit more later, but this is the point where he commits to his life as a mobster and then reaps the rewards and troubles from that. And I also like the stuff with AJ. I thought it was, really accurate for a, young teenager like him. I went through something very similar. I know people don't really like AJ too much. They think he's annoying. But I found him actually really relatable. So really good episode, and stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming soon. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. I'm back with another Soprano log. This time we're looking at Season 2, Episode 8, Full Leather Jacket. There's 3 main plots going on in this episode. I'll knock the first one out of the way quickly. Meadow is deciding where she wants to go to college. She applied to a bunch of different schools, but the one that she's really excited about is Berkeley in California. She wants to get out of New Jersey, get away from her family, and she wants to be part of the culture out there in California. Now, her parents are upset by this. They don't want her to go that far from home. They want her close by, still under their control. When Carmela sees that she gets a letter from Berkeley asking her to send her some forms, I think that's what it is, she throws the letter in the trash because she doesn't want her to go. And by throwing the letter in the trash, she won't get accepted because she didn't respond in time. But later she fishes the mail out of the trash and gives it to Meadow. Though Meadow can see that there's a stain on the envelope, so she can tell that her mother did something to it. But Carmela takes a different approach. So she goes to her neighbor, Jeannie Cusimano, and Jeannie's sister, her twin sister actually, played by the same actress, works as a lawyer, and she went to Georgetown, which is one of Meadow's schools. Carmela asks Jeannie to ask her sister to write a letter of recommendation. This makes Jeannie kind of uncomfortable. She knows that the sister doesn't want to do it because she doesn't know Meadow. And the sister already wrote a letter for, this underprivileged kid from the projects who really deserves to go to Georgetown. So the sister declines, and then Carmela goes to there herself and basically threatens her. She's acting all sweet, but the sister knows who she is and who her husband is. So there's that threat, that implication that if she doesn't write the letter, something might go wrong for her. So Carmela successfully intimidates her into writing the letter. And basically making sure that Meadow gets to go to the college that Carmela wants her to go to. So Carmela's pretty gangster about this, college stuff. But that's the C plot going on in this episode. The more important things going on are, number 1, Silvio and Paulie go to Richie and they tell him that he needs to build a ramp for Beansy. Remember, Richie paralyzed Beansy a couple episodes ago, and they want him to build a ramp for Beansy as a way to kind of make it up. Beansy has a lot of friends, and this will be a good gesture to start patching that relationship up. He refuses. He doesn't want to take orders from anyone. He's a captain now. He's got an attitude. But eventually he relents when Tony basically orders him to. He also gives Tony a jacket. It's the jacket! It's this leather jacket he took from this guy, Rocco DeMeo, who he, beat up and drove out of town. And he gives it to Tony as a gift. He's really excited about it. Tony really doesn't like the jacket, but he has to take it anyway to be polite. And I think this really is a power move on Richie's part. He's saying, on one hand, I can dress you if I want. I can make you wear the clothes I want you to wear. He's trying to assert himself over Tony. And there's another hidden message there, I think, that he's like, I beat up the last guy who wore this jacket, and now you're wearing it. Don't forget that I'm tougher than you. So it's a dominating move on Richie's part. But later on, he sees that Tony has given the jacket to his maid's husband, basically just, donated it. And Richie's really insulted by this. He's really hurt. And, he slumps away. And we can see that, his anger towards Tony is only growing and growing. So that's the first thing that happens. The second thing that's happening is Chris and his friends, Matt and Sean, are breaking into some safes. We get a little detail of Pussy got his start as a cat burglar, and that's where he gets the name Big Pussy, because he's a fat guy, and a pussy is in a cat burglar. But Matt and Sean really want to move up the ranks. They try talking to Tony, but they fuck it up, and he completely shuts them down. They're further embarrassed later when Furio goes to collect the money they owe Tony, and he demands an extra $1,000 from them and basically makes fun of them. And they realize that they're nowhere. They're losers. They're at the bottom. And they decide that they need to do something drastic if they want to ever get respect. So they decide that they're going to shoot Christopher. They ambush him outside this restaurant. Even though there's two of them and they have the element of surprise, these clowns can't even kill him. They shoot Christopher, but he ends up killing one of them by shooting him in the head. And then Matt escapes. He goes to Richie for protection. They did it to get in good with Richie because Richie doesn't like Christopher. But obviously, Richie is very pissed off by this. This is just putting him in danger of Tony now. So he chases Matt away. These two are just complete idiots. They don't know what they're doing. They're wannabes. And now they've almost killed Christopher. And Tony, at the end, was just completely shocked that this happened to someone he loved. And there's an interesting note that this is the only episode that ever ends without music. Instead, we just hear Christopher's ventilator and his heart rate monitor. So it's this really great sound design there. We're ending it just listening to Christopher hanging on to life. And it creates this great sense of danger that he might not survive. So a really good episode. We're really starting to get into the end game here of the second season, setting up the conflicts between Tony and Richie, setting up, what happens to Christopher and Matt and how that's going to affect Tony. But can't wait to continue on, and stay tuned for the next Sopranolog, coming soon. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. Today we're going to be looking at the 9th episode of the second season, From Where to Eternity. One of the best episodes this season, and before we get into it, I just wanted to mention that I spent my birthday recording and editing this video for you guys. It's not my birthday when this video airs because I record them way in advance, but I just wanted to let you know, and I hope you all are appreciative of all the work that I do for you. And I'm just saying, it would have been nice if someone had wished me a happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Mr. President.
Oh god, I think I'm gonna puke. Never mind. Let's just get into the video. This is From Where to Eternity. Now Christopher is in the hospital after getting shot. He's lying there and his heart stops for a full minute, and he's rendered clinically dead. Everyone's worried of whether he's going to survive or not, but he manages to pull through. And when he wakes up, the first thing he asks for is Tony and Paulie. They go into the room, and he tells them that he had a vision when he was clinically dead of going to hell. He met his father and some of the other mob associates like Brendan Falone and Mikey in hell, which to them is a bar called the Emerald Piper. It's an Irish bar. They have gangsters there from all across time, as well as like Roman soldiers. So it seems like in Christopher's vision, Italians go to this specific hell, the Emerald Piper. And he tells them that in addition to all the things he saw about his father and the fact that they kill him every night, the same way he died in real life, he tells them that Mikey gave a warning to Tony and Paulie. He said 3 o'clock. Now, Christopher is heavily medicated on morphine from getting shot, so Tony doesn't believe that he went to hell. He thinks it was just a dream. He tells this to Melfi, and Melfi probes into, whether he thinks Christopher's going to hell and whether he thinks Tony is going to hell himself. And Tony says that he's not, that their soldiers are just following codes, and he ends up talking about the fact that, Italians came to America, very poor, to be worker bees, and the rise of the mob was done to protect themselves and to defend their honor and things like that. He's making up excuses for why the mob exists. And Melfi actually challenges him for once. She says, what do you poor Italian immigrants have to do with you? You came from a stable background in terms of, your dad was in this, so you weren't poor. The excuse of, the old school Italians doesn't apply to you anymore. He gets really pissed off at this. But it's the first time we ever see her, really confront him about his hypocrisy, which is really interesting. But even though he doesn't believe that this was a dream, Paulie definitely does. He's deeply disturbed by what Christopher told him. He starts having nightmares about being dragged to hell. And his girlfriend suggests that he goes and sees a psychic. So he goes and sees his psychic, who seems like he can talk to the dead. Some parts seem like bullshit, like, the normal cold reading, but we actually do see him get some details right. He does seem to know some things that he shouldn't be able to know. He guesses of Pauly's first kill, a guy named Sonny Pagano, and it seems like that could be just cold reading because he's throwing out hints. He says son, and then Pauly says he doesn't have a son, which leads into Sonny instead. And then Pauly kind of gives him the hint of Pagano. So he could have just connected the dots on those. But he does seem to know about the Mikey Palmise hit. He asks about poison ivy and if it still itches. So that's really suspicious. That's kind of bordering on supernatural, which there are some supernatural elements in The Sopranos. We'll talk about those more as they pop up. But there does seem to be things beyond just the normal, psychic bullshit going on here. And it's really funny, even though Pauly denies believing in the ghosts and stuff, he storms out. And when he storms out, he gets a chair and throws it in the direction of the ghosts. So even though he's saying he doesn't believe in it, subconsciously we can see that he's terrified that the ghosts are haunting him. He goes to talk to Christopher. There's a great little detail, which he shakes the chair to make noise to wake Christopher up and says that he was cleaning up, basically just so he can wake Christopher up without, taking the blame for disturbing his sleep. But really selfish, great little detail there. But Pauly talks to Christopher and explains that he doesn't believe that Christopher went to hell. Instead, he went to purgatory. And Pauly has this great system for purgatory where he says that, they had to add up all their sins and multiply them, and that's how long they have to wait in purgatory before going to heaven. Pauly thinks he's going to do 6,000 years in purgatory, but eventually he will get to heaven, which is great that he thinks that, he can rationalize all the horrible shit he's done with just basically like a timeout. But great little detail there. Meanwhile, the guys are looking for Matt Bevilacqua, the guy who shot Christopher. He's in hiding right now, and Pussy in particular is worried that Tony thinks he's a rat. He's worried that Tony is suspicious of him, and he's trying to find a way into his good graces. So when an informant comes along and tells him where Matthew is, he leaps at the chance. He brings this information to Tony, and they go in, they find Matt, they capture him. They interrogate him for a little while, pretend that they're not going to kill him, but in the end, they, very coldly execute him. And Pussy goes along with this as a way to get into Tony's good graces, and by the end of the episode, it seems like Tony's more friendly to him than he was before, so this might have alleviated some fears that Tony had about Pussy. The last little subplot going on in this episode is Carmela hears that a Soprano family associate got his Guma pregnant. She really worries about the shame that this would bring on their family if Tony got his mistress pregnant. So she tells Tony that she wants him to get a vasectomy. He refuses at first, he doesn't want to be less of a man, but by the end of the episode, he agrees to it. But Carmela decides at the end that she does not want him to get the vasectomy. Instead, she wants him to be faithful. She's kind of renewed her passion and her love for Tony because of this whole incident with Christopher. And they make passionate love at the end. So that is the plot of this episode. A really good one. We get a lot of, character moments with Christopher believing he's going to hell. A lot of spirituality and the supernatural element. But really interesting episode, and stay tuned for the next Soprano log coming soon. Thanks. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and I'm back with another Soprano log. This time we're looking at the 10th episode of the second season, Bust Out. Now, the title from this episode comes from the fact that the guys are busting out Davy's store. They're basically, since he can't pay them back for the debt he accumulated, they're ordering things on his credit that they have no intention of him ever paying back. So they're ordering things like water, ice coolers, a bunch of other stuff that they're going to sell for basically pennies on the dollar. And they're making money from the fact that nobody is essentially paying for these products, and it's going to ruin Davy's credit and put him out of business. But he has no choice since he can't pay them back. Carmela is actually friends with Davy's wife. She doesn't know what's going on. There's actually a really funny scene when they're having lunch at Vesuvio. Artie offers them a bottle of Ramlosa, which Tony sold to Artie from the bust out on Davy's store. So Davy's wife ended up drinking the water that came from the bust out, which is pretty funny. But Davy's wife introduces Carmela to her brother, Vic Musto. He's a contractor who does like wallpaper and stuff. And he and Carmela are instantly attracted to each other. When he's working on their house, they step into the bathroom and end up making out. And they break it off. They admit that, things just got a little crazy, but they both want each other and they agree to see each other later on for a private lunch together. And we can tell that this is going to lead to some action. Carmela's trying to get something. Davy goes out of business from the bust out. His credit's ruined. There's lawsuits against him. He's going to have to do Chapter 11 and shut down the store, which Tony admits that he knew this was going to happen when he invited Davy into the poker game. He knew that this was an option for him, like the scorpion and the frog, as he describes. Davy tells Vic that he's out of business and he owes all this money to Tony Soprano. And Vic decides to not meet Carmela for their lunch after learning about, who her husband is and how, ruthless he is. Meanwhile, Richie is unhappy with his cut of the bust out and the fact that the garbage routes, he's not making as much money as he feels he should be. There's all this pent up resentment from the fact that, Tony gave away his jacket and he's not being respected. Janice kind of eggs him on during sex, telling him that she thinks he should be in charge and encourages him to, take out Tony and become the boss. And therefore, she'll be married to the boss now and she'll reap all those rewards. Really vicious character, Janice, completely selfish, but that's what she's okay with her own brother getting taken out if it, brings her more wealth. Richie approaches Junior and talks to him about potentially taking Tony out and Richie taking over. Junior's not on board right now, and he warns Richie against trusting Janice, saying that she's only looking out for herself. Even since she's a child, she's just been stealing and trying to get as much as she can. So he warns Richie against her. Now, the main plot line going on in this episode is there was a witness that saw Tony kill Matthew Bevilacqua. He wasn't able to make out Pussy, but he got a clear view of Tony and went to the police. He doesn't really know who Tony is yet, but now the FBI are looking into this. They want to talk to Tony. They want him to come down to the police station and give his story. Tony refuses, but he's really scared that he's going to go to jail for the rest of his life for this murder. He's really depressed. He starts acting out, particularly against his son. He wanted to bond with AJ because he wants to help prepare him to be a man in case, Tony ends up going away and he's not there for him. But AJ goes and hangs out with his friends instead. And so Tony therefore misses his swim meet. And we can tell that just Tony's really emotionally unstable right now. He's not acting logically. In the end, though, the witness recants when he learns from the newspaper that the murder victim was a Soprano family associate, and he realizes that he does not want to testify because there could be bad consequences for him. So he recants his story, and now Tony's in the clear because all they had on the murder was an eyewitness. Tony's relieved. He goes out and bonds with AJ. They go take the boat out, and there's this great scene where they're driving the boat, and they drive too close to another little smaller boat, and it tips the boat over when the wake from the water hits them. And we can see that, Tony and AJ just completely don't care. They're in their own world. And it just goes to show you that they only really think of themselves. They don't care who they hurt along the way. But really great episode. It was fun seeing Robert Patrick. I just saw Terminator 2 the other night, and it's funny seeing him, be a little crybaby in this episode. He's very weak compared to that character. But great episode, and stay tuned for the next Sopranolog coming soon. Thanks. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. We're back with another Sopranolog, and this time we're looking at the Season 2 episode, House Arrest. Now, the title of this episode comes from a parallel situation happening between Tony and Junior. So Tony is told by his lawyer that he needs to insulate himself from all his criminal activities. Last episode, he almost went to jail over the Matthew Bevilacqua hit. And his lawyer advises him to take a step back away from the guys and spend more time in his legitimate businesses so he's not a big target for the feds. Tony agrees to do this, but he's really bored. He doesn't like just sitting around an office. He wants to be doing crime stuff. He wants to hang out with the guys, even though, it's bad for him legally. It exposes him to risk. He just finds himself incredibly bored and depressed when he's not doing that kind of stuff. It's funny, he actually complains about not being able to really take enjoyment out of anything now. He says he was watching the movie Seven, and, he complains that what's the point in figuring out, the plot and who the killer is. Which is true for most people, unless you have a YouTube channel where you analyze movies and TV shows. Then there is a point to watching countless amounts of television and movies. So just keep that in mind, Tony. But meanwhile, Junior's in the hospital. He's having some surgery done. And he runs into an old friend of his from school, a woman named Catherine Romano. She was married to a cop, but she's still friendly with Junior, even though her husband has passed away now. She wants to see him and associate with him, but he refuses at first. One, because he doesn't want her to know about, his illness and his house arrest. He's kind of ashamed about those things. But also, he's interested more in like younger women. There's the nurse who's helping him with his sleep apnea. He actually talks about his girlfriend, Bobby, who he shoved the pie into her face. But she doesn't want anything to do with him after that. So he kind of realizes that he's, alone now. He doesn't really have many people left in the world. And so he agrees to, start associating with her. She comes over, they talk. Livia actually calls, and when she learns that Junior has been associating with Catherine, she actually brings up the fact that Johnny felt her up one time. And I think she's doing this because she wants Junior to feel insecure. She wants to manipulate Junior and control him. But Junior's really pissed at Livia for, manipulating him into almost killing Tony. So he doesn't want anything to do with Livia anymore. And he hangs up on her. And he comes clean to Catherine and is honest with her about his house arrest, and she accepts it. And by the end of the episode, she's taking care of him and kissing him. It's really affectionate, and it's really nice to see that Junior has a friend in his life and someone he can rely on. He doesn't have a wife or children, but now he has someone in his life who actually cares about him. Meanwhile, Melfi is dealing with a lot of stress from treating Tony. She's horrified by the things that he tells her, and she started drinking in between sessions. So it's really interesting that we get to see that the therapy is really affecting her negatively, interacting with Tony. He's just that bad of a person that it's kind of wrecking her psyche. While she's out at dinner with her son, she gets into this confrontation with a woman who's smoking, and we can just see that Tony's really rubbing off on her in a negative way. She's much more confrontational. She throws something in the woman's face, and we can see that she's just spiraling. She doesn't know how to keep treating Tony without it destroying her. But at the same time, she can't stop seeing Tony. Even though Tony doesn't really want to keep going to therapy, she wants him to keep going. She's really attracted to the horribleness of the things that he tells her. It's like watching a train wreck. She just can't look away. So Melfi's in a really dark place right now in this episode. Meanwhile, Richie is creating headaches for Tony. He dumps a truck on a problem customer, which draws, negative attention to them. But more importantly, he's selling drugs along the garbage routes, which risks the entire operation. It could bring the DEA and the feds down on them. Tony tells him to stop, but Richie is just giving him a lot of attitude. He's not listening to him, and Tony starts having panic attacks again. Now, I think the reason for that, one, is it's not that he's scared of Richie, but he's just so angry at Richie, and he can't really do anything because Richie's going to be a part of his family. He's marrying his sister, so he can't act out violently to Richie, and so all these negative emotions cause him to just pass out. But the other thing is that because Tony is not, participating in crime and not doing things anymore, he has a lot of time by himself to just sit and think. And Melfi, when he talks to Melfi about this, she describes him like a shark. he has to keep moving. He can't stop, or else he'll think about all the horrible stuff he did. And stepping away from, his criminal activities has caused him to just have these negative psychological problems when he actually has to be alone by himself. So I think that's why he's having those panic attacks. There's actually a really funny scene with Tony when he goes to the hospital with this doctor, and he's yelling at the doctor because she doesn't know what's wrong with him, and then she says losing a little weight couldn't hurt. It's a great burn, and I wonder why this is never shown in any like clip compilations. Like, this is a really funny moment from the show that I barely recognize because it's not on YouTube most of the time. But interesting stuff going on. At the end, Tony decides that he's going to go back to his friends, and there's a nice little ending here where they're all together, they're all bonding, and it's going to be one of the few times we see him genuinely happy going back to the life. It's only going to be more headaches from here. But really interesting episode. I really like how the house arrest angle parallels Junior and Tony. Junior's under a legal house arrest, and Tony's under a self-imposed house arrest. But both these things affect them negatively in their lives. So really good episode, and stay tuned for the next Sopranolog coming soon. Thanks. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here, and I'm back with another Sopranolog. This time we're looking at the penultimate episode of the second season, The Knight in White Satin Armor. We got a lot of things going on this episode. It opens with Tony helping Janice move into their new house. Even though he's being supportive of the marriage by like throwing an engagement party and helping them move, Tony is not happy about this marriage. He really doesn't like Richie, especially after all the trouble Richie has caused him, including continuing to deal drugs along the garbage route. And because of this, Tony denies Richie a bid for a garbage contract that would have brought him a lot of money. So we can see the tensions really starting to boil over. Richie's really upset by this, and he goes to Junior. Now, Junior's also having troubles. He's got really high legal fees with his upcoming trial, and the drugs that they were dealing are helping him pay for all this. So upset with how Tony's been, treating them, they decide to conspire against him and take him out. Meanwhile, Tony breaks up with his longtime girlfriend, Irina. He's not enjoying being with her anymore. She's too helpless, too needy, and dependent on him. So he decides to break it off. Carmela notices her perfume on his clothes, so she realizes that he's still seeing her. She ends up trying to commit suicide. She takes a lot of pills and drinks some vodka and ends up in the hospital. Tony gets the call that she tried to commit suicide, and Carmela hears this too. And she's just really upset by this. She doesn't like this coming into their lives, especially since she tried to have an affair too with Vic Musto to kind of get back at Tony. But Vic didn't want to see her after he learned who her husband is. So Carmela's just really frustrated with where her life is right now. Tony tries to get Irina into therapy. He thinks it might help her out and stop her from trying to commit suicide again, but she refuses. Being Russian, she doesn't trust psychiatrists because in her country they're used to basically land people in prison. There's a funny line where Tony's saying that he went to a lot of trouble to get the psychiatrist's phone number, when in reality all he did was ask Melfi for the number, so it wasn't any trouble at all. But Tony's just trying to exaggerate the amount of effort he put into this, which is pretty funny. Meanwhile, Pussy wants to become an FBI agent. He's gone full over to the FBI. He hates La Cosa Nostra. His handler thinks it's a case of Stockholm Syndrome. He can't really balance out his two lives. One is a mobster, one is an informant. So he's trying to reinvent himself as this, police officer, and he's thinking that, after he does his time, he'll be able to, work with the FBI, work with law enforcement, which is not going to happen. He finds out that Christopher is planning to hijack a truck of Pokemon cards, and he follows Christopher, taking notes on his recorder like he's an FBI agent, and he's trying to get more information, again, to be an asset to the FBI. He ends up running over a kid on a bike, and that kid ends up in a coma, which lands Pussy in really big trouble, and his FBI handler, Skip, has to finally sit him down and tell him, look, you're never going to be an FBI agent. that's not going to happen. He's got to stop living these delusions. But Pussy's just really upset, and he's realizing that he can't reinvent himself. The choices he's made are going to stick with him forever. Meanwhile, Richie approaches Albert to see if he'll go along with the plan to take Tony out. Apparently, the Barisi crew, led by Larry, who's in prison right now, is the biggest crew in the family, which is interesting because we actually never see any Barisi associates on the show. Albert decides he's not going to go against Tony, especially with Larry's trial coming up. They don't want to go into that not knowing, if the leadership is stable. So Richie is shot down. This makes Junior realize that Richie is not a leader. The Capos don't respect him, and he won't be able to take over. So Junior decides to stick it out with Tony, even though he's still upset with Tony's treatment. So later at the doctor's office, he tells Tony about Richie's plan to have him killed. And Tony rewards this information by giving him more of the cut that Tony stole from him, basically. He went from 5% to 7.5%. So apparently Tony's life is worth 2.5%. But that's settled. Tony decides that he has to now take Richie out before Richie makes a move against him. Meanwhile, Richie and Janice are having dinner. Janice angers Richie by talking about his son. His son, little Ricky, is a dancer. He's really into ballroom dancing. And this really upsets his father. He thinks his son is homosexual. And Janice angers him by, saying that it's not a big deal, even if he was gay. It's pretty funny that Richie doesn't like his son. He seems like a good kid from what we saw in this episode. There's a scene where he's helping clean their house, and he's going to work on the gutters too, which shows that he's a responsible kid. And it's funny that Richie wishes he had a son like Jackie Jr., even though we're going to learn later on that, Jackie Jr. is a complete shithead. So it's funny that Richie just idolizes the masculine Jackie Jr. rather than his own kind of more feminine son. But Richie hits Janice when she says that it doesn't matter if the son is gay or not, which Janice is really upset by this, so she grabs his gun and ends up shooting him twice in the chest and killing him. And Richie dies actually really ironically because, if you remember at the beginning of the season, he told Christopher that he's not allowed to hit a woman unless he's married to her. That's an old school Italian rule. Richie violates this by hitting Janice before they're married. So he kind of died an ironic death in a way. But Janice is really upset. This was just kind of a heat of the moment thing. And she calls Tony to come over and help her, get rid of the body. So they end up cutting up Richie's body at Satriali's using the same equipment they used to cut the meat, which is absolutely disgusting. They dispose of the body. They send Janice back to Seattle. But as they're leaving the house, Tony runs into his mother. And this is the first time they've spoken all season. And they have this, really heated exchange. And it's one of the last times they're ever going to talk to each other, which we'll see next season in season 3. But she ends up laughing at Tony as he falls down the stairs. Now, Tony mentions a similar incident that the whole family was laughing when the dad fell down some stairs. But it just goes to show you what a sick and twisted woman Livia was. She's laughing at her son, falling down in his misfortune. So she's just really fucked up in the head. But Janice ends up going on a bus back to Seattle. Tony goes back home and tells Carmela that Richie is gone. And Carmela tells him that after Meadow graduates, she wants to go on a trip to Rome. And she kind of sarcastically says to Tony that he has to let her go or she's going to kill herself. Kind of referencing, Irina's suicide attempt. So she's just throwing all this shit that he's done back in his face. And Tony, at the end of the episode, is just reflecting on how shitty his life is right now, all the trouble he has going on. So really great episode. I'm really sad to see Richie go. Rest well, sweet prince. We hardly knew you. What an absolutely great character. He's one of my favorite villains in the season. He just has this incredible intensity and some of the greatest lines in the entire show. So yeah, it was great to see him while we had him. And stay tuned for the season 2 finale. That's going to be an amazing episode as well. Coming up soon. Thanks. What is up, Sopranos fans? Kino here. I'm back with another Soprano log. And today we're looking at the season 2 finale, Funhouse. We've reached the end of another season. And I just want to thank you guys so much for continuing to watch these videos. It really means a lot to me to be able to share these with all of you guys and have you enjoy them. So thank you guys so much for all you do in supporting the channel and continuing to watch my videos. Now, real quick before we get into the video, I have an announcement. A couple of fans have asked for a way to, directly support the channel. Oftentimes my videos get, copyright claimed, demonetized, even taken down in some cases. And that's because I use clips from the show in my videos. I could get around this by using still images, but I think that overall those would make the videos worse and less enjoyable to watch. So I prefer to use video clips, even when sometimes it messes with monetization. But like I said, some fans want to support me and ensure that I'm able to continue to make these videos. So to that end, I've created a Patreon. And this is a way for anyone who wants to support me to be able to do so, and there'll be some rewards for anyone who wants to do that. But before I explain what those are, I just want to preface this by saying I'm never going to lock my content behind a paywall. I want my videos to be enjoyed by everyone, and my videos will continue to come out on their normal schedule. The Patreon will not affect that. This is just some extra rewards for people who, like I said, want to support me and want to ensure that I'm able to continue to make content like this for you guys moving forward. So I'll explain what the tiers and what the benefits are. But for those of you who are not interested, I'll put a time code right here for you to skip ahead to where I get into the episode review. But for the cool cats who are still sticking around here, I have 2 tiers right now available on my Patreon, an associate tier and a maid tier. The associate tier for $1 a month, gets you early access to all of my videos. I actually have all of season 3's Sopranologs ready to go by the time you watch this. So if you want to just watch all of those right now, you can definitely do so. Just become a patron. The maid tier, this is where you get your button. If you want to be an official member of the crew, you can do so on this tier. And I will give you a personal shout out at the end of all of my videos in the credits. Like I said, season 3 is already done, so I might have to do this just in like a comment section. But moving forward, I'll actually give you a shout out within the video itself. But in either of these tiers, another benefit is that I'm looking for input on what kinds of videos I make moving forward. Obviously I'm going to review every episode of The Sopranos before the movie comes out. And I want to continue to make more Soprano analysis and movie reviews like I've been doing. But I think the logical thing for me to do once I'm done with the Soprano episodes is do another television show, review it episode by episode. And what show I do is really up for debate. I'm looking for input from my patrons to help me decide, what would be the most enjoyable for you guys to watch. There are a number of different options we could go through, but I'm just looking forward to getting that input from you guys and helping me determine the channel's future. So again, if you guys want to do this, thank you so much, but I think I've rambled on enough about this, so let's jump into the episode. This is Funhouse. The episode opens with Tony arranging for his mom to fly to Arizona. Janice gone, there's basically no one to take care of her, and neither of the kids will take her, so their only option is to send her to go live with a relative. Tony uses one of the airline tickets he got from the Scatino bust out, and basically sends her on her way. He doesn't want anything to do with her. Besides that, though, things are going good with Tony. With Richie gone, he has no enemies and no real problems. He's out celebrating with Pussy. They go to eat at an Indian restaurant, and then they go to Vesuvio's to have some snacks and things there. Later that night, though, he has this really vivid dream where he's setting himself on fire. It's a really strange dream. There's Spoons, who Tony had killed earlier. There's all the guys there, and the dream doesn't really make any sense. And we're going to deal with a lot of dreams in this episode, and I'm just saying right now that I don't think all of them have a specific purpose, like a metaphorical purpose. I think some of them were there just to show how strange dreams are. Sopranos was a really unique show for showing, dream sequences actually how they occur, rather than having them be, really straightforward things that we witness. So Tony wakes up from that dream and starts puking. We realize that he has food poisoning. He thinks it's from the Indian restaurant, of course, but later he starts to suspect that it might have been from the food he ate at Vesuvio's. Tony tries to go back to sleep and he continues to have more weird dreams. One of them, he's at the boardwalk This is where the title of the episode, Funhouse, comes from. There's some boardwalk, funhouse, and attractions nearby. We see Silvio dressed up as Michael Corleone from Godfather 3. I've always thought it was really interesting that he quotes the worst Godfather, the line he's known for quoting, "Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in." And it's funny that line is actually more iconic to Silvio than Michael Corleone, who originally said it. There's that World of Warcraft commercial from back in the day where Silvio says it. So people tend to associate it more with Silvio than the actual movie it came from. And I think probably because Godfather 3 was just a terrible movie in general. But Tony has another dream where he sees himself through one of those binoculars at the beach. And he sees himself playing poker with Paulie in a train station. Then Tony pulls out a gun and shoots Paulie. Again, people read into this what it really means. I don't know if it meant anything as of now. We'll learn later on that, Paulie has his own problems that he causes Tony. But he even says to Melfi within another dream that he doesn't know why he killed Paulie. I think it's just the dreams being strange again. But feel free if you have an idea of what these dreams mean to talk about it. I love listening and reading that discussion. So the next day, Artie comes over and checks on Tony. He denies that his food caused the illness. He thinks it's the Indian food that caused it. They call Pussy to see if he's experiencing any symptoms, and he only has a little bit of diarrhea. So it looks like Tony's the only one who's getting sick by this. Again, I think that his condition is being exacerbated by the fact that, he suspects Pussy is an informant. And we will see that in a dream coming up here. So Tony, again, falls asleep. He has a dream about Melfi. Melfi's asking him about Pussy, how he feels about him. And then they end up having sex, which, Tony's been attracted to her throughout the entire show. So this is him just having that fantasy. As we saw in season 1, he also had dreams about having sex with her. Doc Cusimano comes over to check on Tony. He thinks that it might not have been the Indian food. Apparently the spices that they cook with kill germs. So he puts the blame on Artie, apparently. So it's pretty funny that Artie messed up Tony like this. But Tony again falls back asleep. And this is where he has the dream where Pussy is a fish. And Pussy basically comes out and tells him he's an informant, he's a rat. Now this is Tony's subconscious screaming that at him. He's realized it this whole time. It's why he passed over Pussy for promotion. And he's finally ready to admit it to himself in this dream. So Tony wakes up and realizes what he has to go do. He gets Silvio and goes over to Pussy's house. They tell him that they want him to go look at a boat with them that Tony's thinking about buying. But while Tony's alone in the bathroom, he searches through their things and ends up finding the wire, confirming that Pussy is indeed a rat. So they take him out to the boat. Paulie's already there waiting for them. They take the boat out into the middle of the ocean. They go down below deck, and finally they confront Pussy about being the rat. He tries denying it at first, but then he admits to it. He tries to defend himself, saying that, he was just manipulating the FBI. He wasn't giving them anything serious. But, that's in contradiction to what we saw last episode, where he was full on trying to be an FBI agent. But that's Pussy's whole character arc this season. He's caught between these two worlds, and finally something gives. And in this episode, we see the consequences. So they're really sad to see him go. He was like a brother to them, but at the end, they decide, they kill him. He's a rat. There's nothing they can do. He's got to be taken out. So they tie him up, bag him, and then throw him into the ocean. And Pussy's gone now. Sad to see him go. He was with us since the beginning, but that's the life for these mobsters. Sometimes you even have to kill your own friends. Back at home, though, Livia is arrested when she tries to board the plane with the stolen airline ticket. She tells him that Tony was the one who got it for her, and so the FBI show up at his house and arrest Tony. They find the stolen airline tickets, and he is in trouble now. They actually arrest him as Meadow and her friends are coming home. She's graduating the next day, and of course she's really upset and embarrassed that this happened to her right now of all times. The FBI booked Tony. He ends up making bail, but he's just really upset about this whole thing. He realizes that this didn't have to happen. He didn't have to give his mom this ticket. But in some ways, he's so self-destructive that he was almost hoping that something like this would happen and he would get in trouble. It's Tony's whole depression and why he gets himself into these situations. But this is hanging over Tony's head. He's really upset and scared that he'll end up in jail with all these RICO predicates over his head. Melfi is trying to get him to talk about, his feelings about his mother and what this means for him. But he doesn't want to deal with it, so he just leaves. And as the episode ends, we see Maddow's graduation. It's a happy moment. Tony's happy for her. Life is continuing to go on. We see what's happening across Jersey, both the good and the bad things, as they're having this graduation party at their house. And it's a calm little moment, kind of like the end of season 1, but those charges are hanging over Tony's head. So we're left wondering, what's going to happen next season. I know I say most of the time that these episodes are great, but this really was, one of the best episodes of the show. We lose a main character, someone who's been with us since the beginning. Yeah, we're just really wondering what's going to happen next season. So thank you guys so much for sticking with me for another season of The Sopranos, and season 3 will be coming up very soon. Thank you.